In today's video, I'm going to share with you 2 examples for each of Amazon's 14 leadership principles in order to help you to better brainstorm for your own stories and to give a better idea on what's a good answer for a behavioral question during the Amazon interview. Customer obsession is by far one of the most common leadership principles at Amazon, and the easiest question related to this principle is, tell me, how do you show customer obsession? However, for the sake of a better answer here, let me give you another example. Like, for instance, tell me about the time you were not able to meet a time commitment, and what did you do given that sequence of events? So here is one possible answer here. One of my clients are in the art gallery business, and I manage their online presence. Now, while this is not a technically challenging task, you have to be very careful because many things happen on short notice and you have to update them throughout the digital channels. And I remember very well in one such instance, it was around the New Year's Eve, which is, by the way, a very busy period for art galleries, that also because an artist was a bit late to provide his materials for the exhibition, but also because my availability was not the best during that time, that we unfortunately introduced a small delay into communicating those details about his exhibition on the website, on our newsletter, and throughout our social media channels. Now, luckily enough, his exhibition went well because he organized it more like a private event. However, ever since we ensured that we would not only ask for these details even earlier than we used to, but we also set up a system in place that would ensure that we would be able to communicate exhibitions even if artists wouldn't provide us all their invitation and all the media required to properly showcase their event. And by the way, the gallery owners have just opened the second gallery downtown. So if the previous example was for entry-level roles, now let me share with you another example more suitable for more senior types of position and for project management roles in general. I remember that in a previous position as a project manager for an HR B2B software as a service in the HR industry, we were tasked to develop a survey designer that would serve the backbone for a big feature, that of a multi-rater survey. Now, this was quite a huge feature that had multiple engines. It has an invitation engine, it has a survey designing engine, and it also has a reporting engine. So as soon as we were done with an early alpha version of this multi-rater surveying software, we demoed it to a small sample of our clients, and actually, contrary to my expectations, instead of them being very interested in designing their own surveys and scoring mechanisms, they were a lot more interested in the reporting section of this feature. So we actually had to pivot all our resources into developing, into focusing on that reporting engine. And luckily enough, that this turned out to be one of the most used feature in our software. So if customer obsession was the most popular leadership principle to talk about, ownership is close second. And to showcase this, let me answer another very common behavioral question. Tell me about the time you faced a conflict on your team and how did you handle it? Now, one of my clients are in the art gallery business, as I just mentioned in the previous example, and my main role there is to manage their digital presence. And I remember that the time that they opened the second art gallery downtown for more established artists, that we gathered with the gallery owners and an arts critic, to decide what would be the best approach to communicate this within a digital context. And the arts critic's position was that if the previous website for the initial gallery turned out to be a bit small, this one should be particularly big because it should embed as much information as possible in order to rank as high as possible in Google search results. Now, on the other hand, I wasn't that keen on the idea because I had the previous experience from the first gallery, and I know that artists are not the best people to ask content from and to manage complex projects with, because they're artists after all. Now, the art gallery owners, they're real estate investors, so you could imagine that they think big, and in the end we arrived to a conclusion after several meetings that we could actually start small, and of course if artists wanted to provide us with more information, we'd be happy to add that on the website. And basically the approach would be here to start small, especially given the fact that there is no monetization business going on within an online context here. So the business is going great for them, and by the way, the arts critic is my friend for around 5 years now. And the second example here is for a more complex question that not many people realize the behavioral question in the first place. Do you collaborate well? Now, let me tell you about the time where I led a team of multicultural developers, and I remember very well that a lot of emphasis had to be put on great communication there. And for this, I ensured that at first we developed our own software project management tool, especially just to manage our projects. And then I also ensured that I would constantly over-communicate with them the requirements and talking everything was going well for them. This was also especially important because my team was working for me remotely. So this prevented us a lot of headaches on the long run, and I believe that this approach of prioritizing a great start were actually the key element for this collaboration to be a great success, because we worked together for around 7 years. Now, Invent and Simplify has a very famous behavioral question asked during many interviews, that is, tell me about a recent piece of innovation that you've done. And here is how I would answer it within my own context here. The most recent piece of innovation that I've done within the past couple of years is with my YouTube channel, where I found an alternative method to provide recruitment marketing services as opposed to just posting job ads on transactional markets. And also the other alternative would have been to post some TV ads where there's no measurability, there's no data-driven decision-making process. So this turned out quite well for me. I mean, it turned out into a full-time business opportunity, and my YouTube channel is even doubling month to month. And by the way, I also provide coaching services nowadays. Now, another possible question here would be to talk about a situation where you found a creative way to overcome a problem. And here's how I would answer it. Now, while project manager at an HR B2B software as a service, we at the point experienced a healthy amount of growth, and while this was good for the business, our database showed signs of weakness here. So the obvious solution was, of course, to invest into a distributed server system. However, this was not financially viable for us at that point in time. So in turn, what I did there was to invent a simple caching mechanism that would ensure that the reports from candidates would be cached like files, and then it would be much easier for the database to handle all this heat. And in fact, this proved to work pretty well for us, because we managed to have hundreds of thousands of people within the same server. Like we had hundreds of thousands of people on the same server with the same database and the same software working together. Now, leaders are right a lot is probably the trickiest of the 14 leadership principles, and it basically means, as just what it says, that successful people are usually very right a lot of the time. And let me give an example here how I would answer the question of tell me about the time you stepped up into a leadership role. So let me tell you about the time when I led a team of around 6 technical developers for an HR software as a service. If in the beginning, if in the first few years the software went great and we acquired ever more clients, then after certain period of time, we experienced a lack of growth, and I really felt like it was the right time for me to step up and assume leadership here, and together with my business partner, who was an HR professional, not a technical one, to really try to see what was going on and what could be done within this context. And truth be said here, I was quite skeptical about the success of the project myself. However, after intense discussions and a thorough decision-making process, we decided to implement another round of features that would be considered as innovative on my end, on the technical side, and on my business partner's end, to try to improve sales. And those were actually the most intense 3 months of my technical project management career, because everyone was feeling a bit demotivated, and they were actually showing their lack of confidence within this project to succeed. But luckily for us, we managed to deliver those set of technical features within time and within budget, and this actually proved to be one of the key elements to revive the project and essentially have a profitable business going on. So if my previous example was geared towards my leadership skills in general, let me tell you now another example that is geared more like a data-driven decision making. So in a previous role as a technical project manager for an HR software, the holy grail of the software was to advance the idea that personality profiling would gain momentum within a digital context. And we actually developed on this idea for around 2 years. However, data was telling a whole different story. At that point in time, we clearly noticed that it was largely becoming a candidate-driven market for our industry, and we also noticed that many candidates prefer to give as little information as possible within a hiring process. So that's how we actually shifted to what I was always an adept of, that is structured hiring processes and data-driven decision making in general. And but this worked pretty well in our case. I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of people within our software. So learn and be curious is actually not very commonly used as a direct question within Amazon interviews, to my knowledge. However, there are some unique opportunities for you to showcase this one. For example, if you're receiving a question such as, tell me about the time you were dealing with conflict on your team, one possible answer is, let me tell you about the time when I was project manager, where I was leading a team of multicultural developers, and it happened that one particularly talented developer was not happy with the way things were progressing for them. And in fact, I had no idea about this. I found about it by mistake, not from my project lead there, because they weren't apparently discussing too much about this, but because of the fact that I was trying to always over-communicate with my team there, he somewhat showed reticent to some changes in the software, and he wasn't very communicative. So then I tried to explore, to dive a bit deeper into details and see what was going on. And he then, in fact, told me that he wasn't really happy that he wasn't the lead, the team leader, because he was the most talented, and he said he was really hardworking. So then I contacted immediately our team leader, and I asked her what was going on, and she told me, yeah, all right, this developer is very talented, but hey, he's sometimes showing up late at work, and he at times as well feels a bit disconnected with reality. So I called a meeting between the three of us, and again, I tried to listen as good as I could all parties, and I actually gave my team lead. I actually agreed with her that this developer was not particularly good in a leadership role. And in fact, we tested that particularly talented developer for another project within a leadership role. However, he didn't like it actually. And luckily enough, he went on to stay with us as a particularly talented developer for another 5 years. And another option to showcase this learn and be curious principle would be to answer a question such as, tell me about the time you missed a solution to an obvious problem. So for this, let me tell you the story of my YouTube channel. If in the beginning there were not many people watching my videos, I always did my best to explore, to do some extensive A/B testing on what could work best in my case. And I've done this in a series. So first I used to speak to the camera whatever I felt was interesting, which didn't work out. Then I started doing a leadership principles, which, by the way, the first video in that series was Amazon's 14 leadership principles, which immediately started to gain a lot of attention. However, it wasn't until, I believe, a good 6 months after that I realized that it's Amazon as a peculiar company that is the content that's really interesting to people, and it's the way to go here. So this is the main thing that I wanted to highlight here, is that it's this exploratory work that ensured the relative success of my YouTube channel. And I believe that the key to a successful YouTube channel nowadays is always to try to explore more and more options to see what content people would really want to consume. So while hire and develop the best is probably not the most famous of Amazon's 14 leadership principles, and it might only be asked for primarily for HR roles, there are, however, some things that we could exemplify here, such as a good question for this to showcase this type of principle is, tell me about the time you motivated a group of individuals. So let me tell you about the time where I led a team of multicultural developers, and as within any IT roles, you know that turnover is quite high with these things, especially if your team is young. So what I did here to try to keep my members on the team and keep them motivated was to always try to over-communicate with them and always try to show that their work was meaningful for this project. And of course, it did happen for me that a team member wanted to leave to a competing business because we couldn't, and he actually used the reason for his salary to be raised for, I don't know, 20%. As the main reason to leave for a competitor. But when I said with them and essentially, yes, negotiated, but at that time just discussed what was going on, it was another problem that was the root cause of this issue there. He wasn't getting along too well with the team lead. So then I got together with my team leader, and between the three of us, we decided on a new management strategy there that would actually work towards empowering the talented even more than we used to empower our developers within the team. And luckily this negotiation strategy worked quite well in this case, and he went on to stay with us for around 2 years. Now, another possible example here with respect to hire and develop the best would be talk about the time where I was involved in outsourcing small IT jobs, and one of the main factors for the success of this initiative is to really hire and develop the best possible people they could find. Now, of course, they are not the best in the world, but they are the best in your case, and this is what matters most. And for this, I always ensure that I keep a great relationship between the two parties. And not only this, but as the business grew, I also ensure that I would hire people not necessarily to work on a given project, but to see how they could perform within a given context. And I always only wanted to hire the people that were well connected to the latest trends and with the latest technologies. And this is how I delivered over 50 such projects. Now, insist on the highest standards is also a pretty common leadership principle to showcase within your answers. And now, how do you show that you are serious about these highest standards? Well, one way would be to show that you actually collaborate well, because this is very important, especially for teams, for companies such as Amazon that have so many teams. So here's how I would answer a question: do you collaborate well? With keeping this principle in mind. So one of my clients are in the art gallery business, and I manage their digital presence. And while these things are not technically complex, the main challenge here is to always ensure that the information that our artists and our other media outlets provide us to publish through our channels is accurate. And to give an example here, it's not uncommon for us to receive an invitation for an artist exhibition that is in too low resolution, or it is not uncommon for us to have to change the dates for an exhibition on short notice. So this is why I had to set up systems in place that would ensure that, for instance, I had common calendars with the owners of the gallery, just in order to always stay synchronized with what was going on, because things can happen on short notice, and also try to add a bit to add more time to ask artists well in advance to provide us with their documents, so everything could stay updated. So luckily this is going quite well, and the art gallery owners have just opened a second gallery downtown. Now, another possible question that you may use to showcase this insist on the highest standards here would be to we all do things that we wish we could take back at times. So tell me about a situation where you wished you would have handled the situation differently. So let me tell you about the time where I managed a team of multicultural developers, specifically when I appointed a new team lead. So while she was great technically speaking, she wasn't too communicative. And as my team was working remotely for me, I felt like this was a pretty serious problem. So I decided to coach her, and I started to ask her how she would react into certain situations. And I felt like she wasn't really paying too much attention to what I was saying. I felt like we were not connecting each other too well. So then I started to try to push a bit harder to see what she would do in certain scenarios. And because of our situation becoming pretty tense, she actually started to cry. And ever since I learned my lesson to at first read a bit about the other party's culture and how they are used to doing things before actually engaging into more tense such tense situations. But luckily enough, we worked together for around 7 years. So think big is another pretty common leadership principle that getting asked questions about during Amazon interviews. And one such question could be, tell me about the time you were facing a problem that had multiple solutions. So let me tell you about the time where I was a technical project manager in an HR B2B software, where me and my business partner, after experiencing around 2 years of steady growth, we felt like the software the business was a bit starting to go in the wrong direction there. So we analyzed the situation, and we realized that actually the development was going great. Our developers were providing great quality. Our clients were also happy. So we had to look into other opportunities. We had to find other options to grow our business. And for this, we implied a lot of qualitative and quantitative analysis here, and we actually decided to develop more innovative features. And not only that, but we also decided that we could invest at the same time into introducing into adding a new sales effort to add new clients using that set of innovative features as a pitch in that case. And yes, this proved to be the winning solution in that situation. And I believe that the sales grew around 200% in the first 2 quarters of the next year. And another interesting question to test these think big principles could be, tell me about a time where you had to choose between technologies for a project. And for this, let me tell you about the time where I was outsourcing projects from clients to my own teams of developers. It was always challenging to pick the technology that would have to get used for a project, and the choice was often between the PHP, the freeware version, and the .NET, the Microsoft version. And the decision would often come down to what type of project it was, in the sense that was it a short-term project in which I could maybe use some components, in which case I would often go with the .NET version because it had a lot of ready-made components within this regard, or it was a more long-term project that requires a lot of customization, in which case I would often go with the PHP version. And by the way, there was also the obvious budget constraint to take into account, but I felt like this went quite well because I believe that it only happened to me once to switch the technology for a project before the project completion, because the essential part of this whole thing was to deliver for our clients with the right type of quality and on time. So bias for action is also a very common Amazon leadership principle, but especially for entry-level roles. It often goes very well with ownership, and for this let me showcase a pretty standard question. Tell me about the time when you sacrificed short-term goals for long-term success, which by the way is the definition of the ownership principle. Probably the best example here would be to talk about my latest business decision that I made with my YouTube channel, because early in 2019, as business started growing quite well, I had to decide on whether to invest into new tools or to keep doing my videos using my iPhone 7. And this was not an easy decision also because some financial constraints. However, I decided the main priority for me would be to have a steadier upload schedule on the longer term. And if you think about it, investing in new tools wouldn't put me out of business if this turned out to be a bad decision. So I decided to go ahead, and for this I had to delay my uploading schedule by I think 2 or 3 weeks. However, this turned out to be a great investment with no loss actually, because as soon as I started publishing videos with my new setup, not only they are easier to put together and I have more time to invest in the scenario, but also there are more views on these videos. So in this case, this turned out to be as a successful solution. And the second example to showcase this bias for action principle would be with another question that I used before, that is, tell me about the time you were 75% into a project but you had to shift pivot strategies. So let me tell you about the time where I was project manager for a technical HR B2B software, where at one point we decided to integrate as many job boards as possible with our software to allow our clients to post job ads throughout the internet. And there are many dozens of such possible job boards. However, as soon as we integrated the 7 most popular that we knew, we immediately spotted something very interesting, that everyone was posting job ads through just one of them. So we had to suddenly decide to change our strategy from integrating more job boards to integrating them better. So we actually decided to integrate that job board as good as possible to actually build we actually became their premium partners after a short time, and this sudden shift in focus ensured that we actually gained some pretty good momentum, and it turned out that I believe that 90 to 95% of the job ads were posted to their job board alone, which was, to be honest with you, very profitable for us. So frugality is a pretty important leadership principle, that of accomplishing more with less, and for this I believe the best possible question that would showcase this trait would be, tell me about a time when you dealt with ambiguity. So let me tell you about the time where my good friends and clients, real estate investors, started their first arts gallery. I was the guy who knew about IT, and they were real estate investors, and together with an arts critic we tried to arrive to a successful compromise in this case. So they were dreaming big because the building that they bought was big. The art gallery was also thinking big because he saw it as an opportunity to add as much information as possible to the website. So they built their online presence. And however, on my end, I knew that there was no business plan on this on a digital context that would bring in cash on the short or on even the medium run. So it was a pretty intense negotiation process, because I knew also that if we start with a large website, then the resources invested into the website would quickly be depleted, actually, because it's not easy to create a huge website. So luckily in the end we arrived to a certain compromise to start relatively small and to add more content as the business evolved, and luckily this turned out to work quite well, because they are my clients for 6 years now, and they just opened the second art gallery since. And the second example with respect to frugality would be to talk about my first money-making job that I had around 15 years ago, when the internet was just getting started, when I used to bid and to win many small projects on the internet, which I would then outsource to my teams of remote developers. But despite the fact that this was pretty much into a cash-strapped environment, because I probably couldn't have afforded hiring people full-time, this turned out to be quite a valuable thing for the long term, because if you see nowadays, pretty much any major company has become a significant outsourcing powerhouse. So an interesting question to showcase earned trust would be, tell me about the time when you received negative feedback from your manager and how did you handle this. So I remember in a previous business we were delivering an HR B2B software. I was in charge of the technical part of things, and my business partner was an HR veteran. And I remember whenever we had to develop new prototypes for features to be used in the software, my business partner used to be very picky as to what content, specifically what text and where the buttons would be on that given screen. And for this, I always did my best to listen at first as well as I could, and then not only that, but to provide him with a very early alpha, a very rough sketch of this prototype, into which he would add his comments, and then instead of showing him the beta version after his feedback was done, I always done my best to add that little extra touch there to really try to innovate a little bit on my end and to become creative. So I tried to predict what he would like to happen for those screens, and this helped a lot to mitigate our various disagreements that we sometimes, as it is normal, had, and our business went on for around 6 years. So if my previous example was talking with a higher up, now let me showcase an example in which I talk with my direct reports and within this earn trust context. So in a previous role as the project manager of a team of multicultural developers, I always went above and beyond to over-communicate the project needs. And because it was a very challenging environment and we always had changes and various clients that requested many different things and changed their mind a lot, it would happen at times that we had misunderstandings within our own team and people that were simply not happy with how things were going, because things were too fluid at times, even if the team was young. So for this, I always ensured that I always employed a diplomatic stance here. I always listened to everyone. I always tried not to rush decisions. And basically, it also encouraged them to talk between them, because developers tend to be introverts. And luckily, this worked quite well in this scenario. We worked together for around 7 years. So dive deep is another pretty important leadership principle at Amazon, and the first example will be straightforward. I mean, dive deep could also be used in a leadership context, that you communicated effectively with all the members of your team in order to see what went well and what didn't. So let me just quickly showcase an example here in 15 seconds. So as a project manager of a multicultural team of young developers, I was in charge of handling communications and communicating my client requests to my team of developers. And for this, to ensure the successful collaboration, I also tasked them to design our own project management software. And I ensured that I'd communicate almost on a daily basis with every one of them, to basically over-communicate and also be diplomatic within our relationship. So of course, we had it happened that we had challenges. However, our business relationship went on for 7 years. Now, for the second example here, I believe this is the interesting example to give here, because it applies to many types of engineering roles within Amazon. And the most interesting question here is, tell me about the time you use data to develop a strategy. So let me tell you about the time when I was project manager for an HR B2B software, which I also designed. And while designing the software, I also ensured that I would design some reports that would give me a good level of analysis onto what worked and what not within the software. And I remember very well in once on one such instance that we had tracked the pass rate within each step of the hiring process that we had in the software. And I remember one such key metric of the pass rate for a step called the personality profiling was particularly low compared to the others. So we had to take a closer look at that step in order to see what was going on. And luckily enough, by employing both this type of quantitative analysis through the report, but also qualitative analysis with my business partner who was an HR veteran, and we decided to make this step optional, which in turn allowed us to have our pass rate increase, I think 3 times immediately, just because of that analysis. So have backbone, disagree, and commit is another very interesting leadership principle at Amazon, especially for senior roles. And the main reason for this to happen is because many of the questions during the behavioral interview are such as, we all have to deal with people that don't like us. Tell me about the time you had to deal with such a person. How did you handle the situation? So for this, let me tell you about the time when I was having a business relationship with my partner for an HR B2B business, and his values were particularly more conservative than mine. So at first, I'd often ensure that I thoroughly listened to what he had to say, because also it was the language difference. So I felt it was really, really important for me to understand what he was talking about. Then, also key to developing our relationship was to act diplomatic at all times. Now, setting this leadership component aside, I would always ensure that I look deep into the data and try to validate what he said with something factual, some sort of metrics, and of course then present that data to him. And it did happen that he didn't agree with my rationing, even if the data was telling a different story. So I had to simply deliver on what he said, and it was fine. It happened for him to also be right with these things. Also our business relationship developed for around 5 years, and this helped me quite a lot to understand how to deal with other people from whose values are different than mine. So now another example here with respect to probably the same types of questions where a time where I disagreed with somebody. So at the time, my good friends and clients, real estate investors, started their first arts gallery. Together with an arts critic, we had to decide the strategy for their online presence. And real estate investors tend to think big, so do art critics, because that's basically the way of doing things. However, myself, being in information technology, I understand the challenges of developing a huge website with little resources and no actual business plan within a digital context. There was no idea to monetize this communication in a digital context. And despite the fact that I warned them that this was going to happen, actually went ahead and did a pretty decently sized website. At first, I mean, we had 6 pages for each artist exhibiting in the gallery, 6 pages on the website. And this, however, with time, we realized, they actually realized the situation was no longer that sustainable. And nowadays, we only have 1 page for these artists. But so to be clear here, we are talking about a success story here, because they only recently opened the second arts gallery downtown. So the last leadership principle at Amazon deliver results is also not the least important. This is used quite extensively, especially for senior roles. So one particularly interesting question, behavioral question for this principle is: tell me about a hard goal that you have set and achieved. So for this, let me tell you about a time where I was project manager for a confidential business for around 5 years. So if in the first 2 years business was going great, then the project started moving in the wrong direction, and I really felt like the project was beginning to be at the crossroads. So I called a meeting with my business partner and with the other stakeholders of the project, and together we decided, with a very narrow majority here, to implement a given set of features, and we gave ourselves a deadline of 3 months to implement those, and then we'd see how this project would evolve. So I remember even today that this was the most challenging time that I managed a technical project in my career, and I always had to remotivate my team pretty much every day, because they were also seeing what was going on, and some clients were even leaving meanwhile. The bread and butter of my example is that communication in this case proved to be a vital element to help my team to deliver on what we promised we would do. And despite the fact that actually some of the members of my own team left during the project, during those intense 3 months of development, luckily we managed to deliver on the project's specifications before deadline. I remember we finished 1 month early and with the right quality. So this proved to be a very, very important step in that business that fortunately enough started to move in the right direction. And the second example here with respect to this leadership principle of delivering results is to answer a question, do you collaborate well? So these are more on the leadership side of stories here. So let me tell you about the story when I led a team of multicultural developers. We were tasked of handling various client requests, and as I knew this was going to be a long-term project because I hired them for the long term, I first ensured that I design a software together with them just to manage our software development. And I also used another trick here, that is because of our internet connection wasn't allowing video calls at that time. We used text through Skype, and we used that to our advantage in the sense that we tracked all communications, and we'd use that in order to debug any misunderstanding and any problems should they arise. And this was actually one of the vital elements of the success of many of our projects, because our clients was also not were not providing us the clearest specifications possible, and they would often rightfully change their mind. But by over-communicating and keeping diplomacy within a team context, we managed to deliver on many projects this way, and they actually worked for me for around 7 years. So just a few closing notes here. Notice that throughout the video I only employed a handful of examples, and by the end of the video I believe there was quite a lot of overlap that made the video a bit boring to watch, right? So the same thing applies for Amazon interviews, and especially for US senior roles that went all the way to the loop. So if you are on the loop, you're going to be for 5 or 6 hours of continuous interviewing, and 50% of that is behavioral interviewing. So you can imagine that this video was not even 1 hour long. So if you have to speak for hours about these behaviors, there will be overlap going on. So my point here is to prepare more stories if you can for your interview. Then other than this, there's some pretty common sense advice here, like don't use we did this, but use I did this. And it will take you a little bit of time to get used to these things, but so long as you're aware of them, I think you should be fine. And also for the failure stories, try to highlight the last part, the results part of your star answer. Do not talk too much of the failure, and don't be negative. Don't ever end a story on a negative note, because that's setting up the wrong trigger for the follow-up questions. Because if you end it on a negative note, your interviewer won't make you a gift and say, hey, but you did this. No, they want to see what went wrong there, right? Because their job is to identify weaknesses within your profile, because the theory of behavioral interviewing is just to look at your past behavior in order to predict your future behavior, right? Now, other than that, I believe it's pretty much all common sense if you look here, and you of course get better once you practice these things. However, I would always ensure that I'd keep my answers under maybe 1.5 minutes long. Again, this is a matter of practice as well. So, as always, I hope you found this information useful, and thank you very much for watching.